Hi, sixth grade. It's week 2. You survived week 1, and hopefully you are not going crazy in your house like I am. So here's a couple suggestions. First, go outside. Take a break from your books and from your computer screens and go do something outside. There's lots of drills that Arsenal and Rosa made available through parents' emails. If you're a part of that, you can find drills on YouTube for basketball, soccer, any of those things if you want to do some little workout since you're not practicing. Just even sitting in the sun for 15-20 minutes is really good for you. You need to take a break every once in a while. And by break, I don't mean break from homework going right to a video game. Your brain and your body need a break or you'll start to get stressed out. So take your books outside, take your math outside, even if it's raining, enjoy the outside. Water will not hurt you. You can also do a puzzle, color, write a letter, help your parents with dinner. Some of those things sound a little juvenile, but they are actually really helpful in de-stressing your body, taking a mental break so you're not thinking about your schoolwork. We take breaks in school, and you also need to take breaks at home. So make sure you're taking care of yourself while you're stuck inside. This week we're going to read the story Storm by Gary Paulsen. You probably recognize his name. He wrote Hatchet, which I know a lot of you have read. He is a really interesting guy. I watched a little bio about him, and I'm going to attach the link in our week 2 work that gives some background on him and why he wrote the things he did. And Woodsong, which Storm is a part of, is actually a true story. He ran the Iditarod, which is a dog sled race in Alaska. So this is actually a true story. It's an autobiography on his part. And this week we'll be watching out for the words disengage, regain, and emit. So I will pause and make sure we pay attention to those words. This story starts on page 427 in this book that you should have at home. So please find that page and follow along. It was always possible to learn from dogs, and in fact, the longer I'm with them, the more I understand how little I know. But there was one dog who taught me the most. Just one dog. Storm. First dog. Joy, loyalty, toughness, peacefulness, all of these were part of Storm. Lessons about life and finally lessons about death came from him. Page 428. Ooh, sorry. He had bear's ears. He was brindle-colored and built like a truck, and his ears were rounded when we got him, so that they looked like bear cub ears. They gave him a comical look when he was young that somehow hung on to him even when he grew old. He had a sense of humor to match his years, and when he grew truly old, he somehow resembled George Burns. You'll have to Google this guy if you want to see. He is a comedian. So that's what the dog looked like. At peak, he was a mighty dog. He pulled like a machine, until we retired him and used him only for training puppies. Until we let him loose to enjoy his age, he pulled, his back over in the power curve, so that nothing could stop the sled. In his 4th or 5th year as a puller, he started doing tricks. First, he would play jokes on the dogs pulling next to him. On long runs, he would become bored, and when we least expected it, he would reach across the gang line and snort wind into the ears of the dog next to him. I ran him with many different dogs, and he did it to all of them, chuckling when the dog jumped and shook his or her head, but he never saw a single dog get mad at him for it. Oh, there was once a dog named Fonzie who nearly took his head off, but Fonzie wasn't really mad at him, so much just surprised. Fonzie once nailed me through the wrist for waking him up too suddenly when he was sleeping. I'd reached down and touched him before whispering his name. Small jokes, gentle jokes Storm played. He took to hiding things from me. At first, I couldn't understand where things were going. I put a booty down while working on a dog, and it would disappear. I lost a small ladle and used it for watering each dog. A cloth glove liner I took off while working on a dog's feet, a roll of tape, and finally a hat. He was so clever. When I lost the hat, it was a hot day, and I had taken the hat off while I worked on the dog's harness. The dog was just ahead of Storm, and when I knelt to work on the harness, he chewed almost through the side of it while running. I put the hat down on the snow near Storm. Or I thought I had. When I changed the dog's harness, I turned and the hat was gone. I looked around, moved the dogs, looked under them, then shrugged. At first, I was sure I'd put the hat down. Then when I couldn't find it, I became less sure. And at last I thought perhaps I'd left it at home or dropped it somewhere on the run. Storm sat quietly, looking ahead down the trail, not showing anything at all. When I went back to the sled, reached down to disengage the hook. Disengage means unfasten. And when I did, the dogs exploded forward. I was not quite on the sled when they took off, so I was knocked slightly off balance. I leaned over to regain myself. Regain means recover. And when I did, I accidentally dragged the hook through the snow. And I pulled up my hat. It had been buried off to the side of the trail in the snow, very neatly with the snow smoothed over the top so that it was completely hidden. Had the snow hook not scraped down 4 or 5 inches, I never would have found it. I stopped the sled and set the hook once more. While knocking the snow out of the hat and putting it on my head, I studied where it had happened, right next to Storm. He had taken the hat, quickly dug a hole, and buried the hat and smoothed the snow over it. Then gone back to sitting, staring ahead, looking completely innocent. When I stopped the sled and picked up the hat, he looked back, saw me put the hat on my head, and I swear, smiled. Then he shook his head once and went back to work pulling. Along with the joke, Storm had scale eyes. He watched as the sled was loaded, carefully calculated the weight of each item, and let his disapproval be known if it went too far. One winter, a friend gave us a parlor stove with nickel trim. It was not an enormous stove, but it had weight to it and some bulk. Page 430. This friend lived 12 miles away, 12 miles over 2 fair hills, followed by about 8 miles on an old abandoned railroad grade. We needed the stove badly. Our old barrel stove had started to burn through, so I took off with a team to pick it up. I left early in the morning because I wanted to get back that same day. It had snowed 4 or 5 inches, so the dogs would have to break trail. By the time we had done the hill and the railroad grade, pushing in new snow all the time, they were ready for a rest. I ran them the last 2 miles to where the stove was and unhooked their tugs so they could rest while I had coffee. We stopped for an hour at least, and the dogs slept quietly. When it was time to go, my friend and I carried the stove outside and put it in the sled. The dogs didn't move, except for Storm. He raised his head, opened one eye, did a perfect double take, both eyes opening wide, and sat up. He had been facing the front. Now he turned around to face the sled, so he was facing away from the direction we had to travel when we left, and watched us load the sled. It took some time, as the stove barely fit on the sled and had to be jiggled and shuffled around to get it down between the side rails. Through it all, Storm sat and watched us, his face a study in interest. He did not get up, but sat on his back end, and when I was done and ready to go, I hooked all the dogs back in harness, which involved hooking the tugs to the rear ties of their harnesses. The dogs knew this meant we were going to head home, so they got up, started slamming against the tugs, and trying to get the sled to move. Page 431. All of them, that is, but Storm. Storm sat backward, the tug hooked up but hanging down. The other dogs were screaming to run, but Storm sat and stared at the stove. Not at me, not at the sled, but at the stove itself. Then he raised his lips, bared his teeth, and growled at the stove. When he was finished growling, he snorted twice, stood, turned away from the stove, and started to pull. But each time we stopped at the top of the hills to let the dogs catch their breath after pulling the sled and the stove up the steep incline, Storm turned and growled at the stove. The enemy, the weight on the sled. I do not know how many miles Storm and I ran together. 8, 10, perhaps 12,000 miles. He was one of the first dogs and taught me the most. And as we worked together, he came to know me better, better than perhaps even my own family. He could look once at my shoulders and tell how I was feeling, tell how far we were to run, how fast we were to run. He knew it all. When I started to run long, moved from running a work team, a trap line team, to training for the Iditarod, Storm took it in stride, changed the pace down to the long trot, matched what was needed, and settled in for the long haul. He did get bored, however, and one day while we were running a long run, he started to do a thing that would stay with him, with us, until the end. We had gone 40 or 50 miles on a calm, even day with no bad wind. The temperature was a perfect 10 below zero. The sun was bright, everything was moving well, and the dogs had settled into the rhythm that could take them 100 or 1,000 miles. And Storm got bored. At the curve in the trail, a small branch came out over the path while we were running. And as Storm stood beneath the limbs, he jumped up and grabbed it, broke a short piece off, about a foot long, and kept it in his mouth all day and into the night. He ran, carrying the stick like a toy, and when we stopped to feed or rest, he would put the stick down, eat, then pick it up again. He would put the stick down carefully in front of him or across his paws and sleep, and when he awakened, he would pick up the stick, and soon it became a thing between us, the stick. He would show it to me, make a contact and connection between us. Each time we stopped, page 432, I would pet him on the top of the head and take the stick from him. He would emit here means give out or send forth, a low, gentle growl when I took the stick. I'd examine it closely, nod and seem to approve of it, and hand it back to him. Each day we ran, he would pick a different stick, and each time I would have to approve of it, and after a time, after weeks and months, I realized that he was using the sticks as a way to communicate with me, to tell me that everything was all right, that I was doing the right thing. Once, when we pushed them too hard during a pre-Iditarod race, when I thought it was important to compete and win, a feeling that didn't last long, I walked up to Storm, and as I came close to him, he pointedly dropped the stick. I picked it up, held it out, but he wouldn't take it. He turned his face away. I put the stick against his lip and tried to make him take it, but he let it fall to the ground. When I realized that what he was doing, I stopped and fed and rested the team, sat on the sled, and thought about what I was doing wrong. After 4 hours or so of sitting, watching another team pass me, I fed them another snack, got ready to go, and was gratified to see Storm pick up the stick. From that time forward, I looked for the stick always, knew when I saw it out to the side of his head that I was doing the right thing, and it was always there. Through storms and cold weather, on the long runs, the long runs where there wasn't an end to it, where only the sled and the winter around the sled and the wind are there, Storm had the stick to tell me it was right. All things were right. On the following page is a little bit of information about Gary Paulsen, and hopefully you watch the video. It's not required, but it does give you some insight into the author. And the next page, 434, is where you will find the questions that you were assigned that go in the question document. Please keep asking questions, send emails, Google Hangouts. If you need to talk face-to-face, we can do Zoom meetings, but you need to sign up for a time so I know when to get into contact with you. But please keep reaching out because I want to help, especially as I add assignments that are new to you this week, which the new one this week is the TED Talk, which you have to watch and have that sheet ready for you so that you can fill it out while you're watching. And you can always pause and go back in the video. So if you have questions, please email me and come find me. Hopefully you are all doing well. I miss our classroom and I can't wait to be back there soon.